Welcome back. You're watching Your World at 10 on CNBC TV 18. In the last few weeks, the recovery in the US economy has slowed considerably after encouraging signs earlier this year. While most economists and policymakers have called for austerity measures for most economies, Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman says that the US economy desperately needs another big stimulus. Krugman spoke to CNBC's Trish Regan earlier today. Here's an excerpt of that conversation.
Overall, what would you say is the bottom line here? Has the stimulus not worked in the way that you would have hoped?
The stimulus has worked just about in the way I expected, which is to say that it's been a help, but it's a pretty modest thing. You know, $800 billion sounds like a lot of money, but this is something that's spread over a period of more than 2 years. GDP over that period is more than $30 trillion. It was actually an undersized package given the depth of the crisis, which some of us said from the beginning, and so it's helped, but it really wasn't enough.
You know, I remember you telling me that right about the same time that it was rolled out, that you were concerned it wasn't enough. Now when you look at the situation today, what do you think needs to be done? Do you think we're talking about more spending to try and get this economy back on track?
Oh, sure. I mean, let's wave aside the problems of politics for a moment. Everything is pointing to the need for more spending. The economy remains depressed. The stimulus is fading out. You know, the maximum impact on growth was last quarter of 2009, and it's actually going negative at this point as some of the spending ramps down. And the economy clearly has not gotten over this crisis. The bond market is telling us that, you know, not to worry about current deficits. They're happy to lend the federal government money at very low rates. What the bond market is telling us is that it's terrified of deflation, of a weak economy for a very long time. So no, all of the economic data make the case for a stimulus. You know,
how much, Paul?
Oh, I mean, if I had my druthers, as big as the first one. I mean, it's everything suggests that it should be the economic situation is worse now.
Would you include
in terms of unemployment and inflation?
Would you include tax cuts? Would you include a payroll tax cut? Would you look at extending the Bush tax cuts? Would you look at a corporate tax cut as part of that stimulus?
On the last two, definitely not, because, you know, if you give a tax, what is a temporary tax cut, because we can't afford to have permanent tax cuts. If you give a temporary tax cut to wealthy people who are likely to be highly liquid, they're not going to spend very much of it at all. You give a temporary tax cut to corporations, which are sitting on piles of cash, they're not going to spend any of it. So that's just ineffective stimulus. A payroll tax cut is not bad. It's putting money in the hands of people who might well spend it. Government spending is a good thing, is probably the best thing. We have enormous infrastructure needs in this country which are not being met. You know, even aside from the need to stimulate the economy, when the federal government can borrow very cheaply, that's probably a good idea to get some projects started. But basically, I would take whatever we can, except that those high-end tax cuts, corporate tax cuts, are sort of going where the problem isn't, and that's just a waste of money.
Okay, you know, a lot of people would argue with a lot of what you just said, as you well know, but let's leave that aside for a moment, and let's just assume, yes, okay, the government, come this fall, says we're going to go ahead and we're going to spend $800 billion more on this economy. Aren't we running the risk, though, that it's not going to get to the infrastructure projects in time? It's not going to actually make its way into the economy quickly enough to really help the situation? I mean, timing is so much a part of this.
Well, timing is a part of it, but I think it's been much exaggerated. A lot of people who were worried, you know, we can only do stuff that's totally shovel-ready, were talking as if this was going to be a 1 or a 2 year recession, that it was all going to be over. That's not what happens after a financial crisis. After a financial crisis, you tend to have 5 years, sometimes 10 years of depressed employment. So, yeah, I would say, no, it's not a good idea to do something like the Boston Big Dig, that takes 15 years as a stimulus project, but something that doesn't land until the middle of next year. You know, optimists these days are saying 9% unemployment at the end of next year.
But do you really believe, I mean, and I guess this gets to a fundamental issue here, but whether or not this is really the best allocation of capital, I'll just give you a quick little example. Back in New Hampshire, where I'm from, there is a particular development there that was just saw all of its roads paved, and this was all through government stimulus money, that this particular development was able to see its roads paved. Now, you know, I don't know about you, but that seemed like kind of not something that was really critical to the overall economy, something that we really needed. It's anecdote, of course, but what it demonstrates is that sometimes this money gets funneled around, and it's not necessarily going to the places that are going to create the most jobs or to the people and projects that need it most.
Well, but the point is that right now we have mass unemployment. If you put 100,000 Americans to work right now digging ditches, it's not as if you're taking those 100,000 workers away from other good things they might be doing. You're actually putting them to work when they would have been doing nothing. So this is your normal criteria of being, very, very careful that you're spending money in precisely the best way. Don't apply right now in a time of mass unemployment. And listen, we have this stimulus program. There are, if you look hard enough, you'll find examples where it wasn't the best use of money. There have been amazingly few actual scandals. I haven't actually heard anything that was a real outrage of corruption. So this is actually pretty good. And at the time, it's not like the private sector always puts money in exactly the right place either, right? There are a lot of ghost developments right now that were built during the housing bubble that are completely useless or in fact a menace to the landscape. So don't worry that much about it.
One more question for you. A lot of people would ask, how can we afford this right now? I mean, the reality is our generation, my children's generation, all is going to wind up having to pay the price for all this debt the American government is taking on.
The answer is that right now, spending money to put Americans to work is not actually a burden on the future, at least not so you'd notice. It's going to be a little bit more government interest payments, but it's also going to mean that more people have jobs, more students coming out of college can get their careers started. It'll mean more business investment. At the moment, the main thing holding back business investment is lack of demand. So it's actually going to make America richer in the future. This is not, again, we are in unusual times where your usual intuition doesn't apply here. Getting this economy moving is the best thing we can do, not just for the present, but for the future and for our children.
Paul Krugman speaking to CNBC's Trish Regan.